All right, thank you for coming. We're here today to announce the results of an inquiry into certain actions of the Firefighters Pension and Relief Fund of New Orleans. These actions cost citizens $8.8 million last year and a staggering $150 million since 1999. We issued a public letter to the city's leadership that identifies this abuse of public funds. Assistant IG Howard Schwartz will give you the details, and it's a story of manipulation and apparent deceit.
Good afternoon. I'm going to start off. It's a bit unusual, but I'm going to tell you what this doesn't say first, and then I'll tell you what it does say. And the reason why I'm going to tell you what it doesn't say, it's very complicated, it's difficult to understand, and everyone in this room wants the same thing, which is to report this accurately. So I'm going to help you out by telling you three things it does not say. Number one, we are not saying that any New Orleans firefighter is faking an injury or accident to collect disability. We are not saying that. Number two, we are not saying that any New Orleans firefighter's pension should be cut. We're not saying we should take anything away from current firefighters. This is a long-term fix that we want the city to be aware of. And the third thing is, this is not an attack on firefighters. Firefighters is a noble profession. It's an incredibly difficult profession. And what I'm about to tell you doesn't change the actual work they do day in and day out, which is saving lives, saving property. It doesn't change that. This is about the pension board. And the pension board has created lucrative incentives that incentivizes the firefighters to go out on disability. And let me explain. Got to give you a little background first. So back in 2011, the Office of Inspector General is looking at various operations of the city where money's being spent. That's what we do. We follow the money. And we come across a report issued by the Firefighters Pension Board. It's an actuarial valuation report, and it's dated January 1st, 2011. And in the report, it lists numerous financial information, but it also lists the number of disability retirements for firefighters, and it lists the number of ordinary retirements for firefighters. And it showed 492 firefighters were on disability, and 32 firefighters were not. They were on ordinary pension. Here's how it looked. 94% of New Orleans firefighters go out in 2011, went out on a disability pension. 6% didn't. So we looked at these numbers and we said, well, this is almost unbelievable. It doesn't seem reasonable. What is going on here? They're going to have to change training. They're going to have to change equipment. Something is going on to cause an incredible 94% disability rate, especially when compared to the state firefighters pension system for the entire state of Louisiana, which is every fire department except for New Orleans and I believe Baton Rouge. They average about 10% disability. So if the state is 10% disability, why is New Orleans 94%? So we went to the Firefighters Pension Board back in August of 2011, and we said, what's going on here? Why is it 94% disability? And the Firefighters Pension Board basically said, yeah, the numbers are high, but it's not unusual. In fact, a quote from one of the pension board members said, it's a very dangerous job, everybody gets hurt. So over the next few years, the city of New Orleans is involved in various lawsuits with the Firefighters Pension Board. Let's fast forward to May of this year, May of 2016. In May of 2016, we received information that at some point after the meeting I just described back in August of 2011, the numbers were changed on that actuarial valuation report. And the numbers were changed to drastically reduce the numbers of disability or disabled firefighters on pension. So in May, when we heard about this, we looked at the next actuarial valuation report they issued, which was dated January 1st, 2012. And sure enough, the numbers were changed. It reflected now it reflected 240 firefighters were on disability. 297 were retirees. They did away with the ordinary retirement category. So, again, this didn't seem reasonable. It seemed incredible that they could reduce the disability pensions for firefighters after our meeting with them, seemingly overnight, from 94% to 45%. Didn't seem reasonable. So we asked two members of the pension board, the two city representatives on the firefighters pension board, what's going on? And the two members of the pension board told us, and the two members were the chief, the superintendent of the fire department, and the CFO, the chief financial officer for the city. And they said that they disagreed with the board of using the much lower numbers. They wanted to use the accurate numbers. So we asked the pension board in May to give us all their pension calculations, all their documents they have for every firefighter that retired for a 5-year period from 2011 to 2015. Pension board said they could give us 3 years, 2013, 14, and 15, which they did. So the two members of the pension board, who I described, said that they disagreed with using the lower numbers. In fact, they said at a pension board meeting on August 6, 2014, they brought up the fact that they vehemently disagreed with using the lower numbers. They wanted to use the accurate numbers. In fact, they said they had a 15-minute heated conversation, or debate, in their words, heated, over using these lower numbers. But they went and used the lower numbers anyway. And when we looked at the minutes, there's no record of these two board members disagreeing with using the lower numbers. It doesn't say that anywhere. So if you, the media, if the public, citizens, or the Inspector General's office wanted to know a simple thing like, what is the disability retirement rate for firefighters in New Orleans? Seems a simple question. It's not a simple answer. Even though we had all the pension calculations from the pension board for 3 years, even though we had the actuarial valuation report, and if you relied only on the actuarial valuation report, which is the only document we could find that lists the number, you'd be way off. It's about half of what it really is. So the only way to determine a real number of how many disabled firefighters they really have, we had the pension calculations, we had the actuarial report, didn't tell us. We had to go through the minutes of every board meeting for 3 years to determine who they approved for disability retirement. That's how difficult it is to find this information. So I can tell you that the information I give you comes from the pension board. It's their numbers. Then we went to the city to find out how much does this cost. The city employs a third-party administrator called HGI to handle all workers' comp claims, which includes firefighter disability. So we asked the city to provide us with every dollar they spent on firefighters' disability, which they did. So this is their numbers that I'm going to tell you. And then we looked at all the actuarial valuation reports for the city as well as the state. Here's what we found. And this is an accurate number, unlike the actuarial valuation report. In 3 years, the pension, for 13, 14, and 15, the pension board approved 76 retirements. 61 of those, or 80%, were disability. 15 of those, or 20%, were non-disability, were ordinary or regular retirements. Once again, why the difference in the numbers? So we looked at the actuarial valuation reports for every year from 2011. And here's what that shows. In 2011, it showed 94% disability. Inspector General's office goes to the pension board, brings up the fact that what's going on here? Why are these numbers so high? The next actuarial valuation report they issued, they reduced the numbers to 45% disability. The next year, 2013, they reduced it again to 42.5%. The year after that, it's 40%. And in 2015, once again, 40%. When we know the real number is 80%. Why are they doing this? Well, the two members of the pension board also told us that while they're issuing this valuation report showing 40% disability, the same pension board issues tax forms, 1099s, to all retired firefighters. For disability pensions, the pension board produces the 1099 that goes to the IRS that shows 50% of all disability pensions are exempt from federal income tax. So while and they sent that to 80% of the firefighters. So while they issue those tax forms, they know it's 80%, the valuation report actually shows 40%. We ask why. The only conclusion we can come to, if this is done year after year after year, it's done after the Inspector General's office questions the high rate of disability. They change the numbers. Two of the board members disagreed with using the much lower numbers. It's not recorded anywhere in the minutes. The only thing we can conclude is it's done intentionally. It's done to deceive the public, to show a much lower number or rate of disability than they actually have. Now let's look at the numbers a little more closely. Out of the 76 retirements that they approved, the 61 were for disability. Out of that number, only seven of those were given a 66 2/3% disability. That's the highest disability you can get. And that's due to a serious accident or injury or heart, lung, or cancer. We're not talking about those seven. It leaves 54. The 54 firefighters, not on 66 2/3%, they were given 50% disability pension. So when you say 50% disability pension, common sense tells you you get 50% of your pension. And if you get 50% of your pension, the state of Louisiana has a statute, revised statute 23-1221, which establishes supplemental earnings benefits called SEBs, supplemental earnings benefits, where a firefighter that goes out on 50% disability can get up to $30,000 a year to supplement that income to bring them to 90% of what they were earning before their accident or injury. And by statute, they can get this for 520 weeks, which is 10 years. So 54 firefighters in the last 3 years get 50% disability, but they don't get 50%. Pension board gives them whatever the highest level they earn in years. So the more years you work for the fire department, you can get up to 100% of your pay. So if you work enough years, you can get 100%. So the pension board doesn't give them 50%. They give them whatever the highest pension it is, and many of them are at 100%. 41 of them, in fact, were at 100% of their pay. Now the statute says it's to bring that firefighter back to 90% of their pay before the accident or injury. If you're already at 100% and you get supplemental earnings benefits, that means you're now going to get more than 100% of what you were making your last year of work. 87% of the firefighters that went out on disability in the 3 years we looked at are making over 100% of what they would have earned their last year of work. If you say to yourself, how can you make more than 100% of anything? I don't know the answer to that. It doesn't seem reasonable that you can. Now let's look at how this works. So this is a real example from one of the pension calculations they gave us. We're calling him Firefighter X instead of using his real name. We picked this at random. There's people that earn more than this. There's people that earned less than this. We just picked one out. In this case, the Firefighter X worked enough years where he qualified for a 93.5% pension, meaning he worked enough years to get 93.5% of his pay. And you can see by the figures, he would have earned about $62,000, except for he went out on disability, 50% disability. But he wasn't given 50%, he was given his 93.5%, plus supplemental earnings benefits. You put that together, his pension now is $93,000. That's more than 100% of what he was earning prior to his accident or injury. Now let's go back to this number. Out of the 61 firefighters on disability, I said 7 were at 66 2/3, 54 were at 50%. 44 of those had a slip and fall or a strain within 1 year of their actual retirement date, meaning their maximum pension availability. That means they were going to get more than 100% of their pay. 35 of the firefighters in the last 3 years had a slip and fall or strain within 1 year of their actual retirement date. All 35 went to the same chiropractor, and this same chiropractor diagnosed all of them as being disabled. They all got their disability pensions. When the fire department offered transitional or light duty to an attempt to get these firefighters back to work. Transitional or light duty is to be performed up to 4 hours a day with as many breaks as they need, depending on their medical condition. And the types of transitional or light duty offered these firefighters were things like sorting the mail, answering telephones, preparing a presentation on fire safety, watching the fire equipment in the firehouse for theft or loss prevention, literally sitting there watching the equipment, controlling the button that opened and closed the firehouse door. In every one of these cases I just described, 100% of the time where light duty or transitional duty was offered, this same chiropractor said that no firefighter was capable of doing any of those duties. In fact, in the last 10 years, 87 firefighters had a slip and fall or a strain within 1 year of their retirement. All 87 went to the same chiropractor who diagnosed all 87 as being disabled. All 87 are out on disability pension. Now, I'm not a chiropractor. None of us here are medical doctors in the Inspector General's office. We didn't look at any medical records. Even if we did, we're not qualified. Even if we reviewed them, we wouldn't know what we're looking at. So when I told you in the beginning, we can't say, we're not saying that any firefighter is faking anything, because we can't say that. It seems unusual, it doesn't seem reasonable that 87 firefighters could have a slip and fall or strain within 1 year of their actual retirement date maximum, go to the same chiropractor and all 87 be diagnosed as being disabled. Doesn't seem reasonable. We can't say any of them are faking. Now, since this chiropractor determined that none of the firefighters were capable of doing any of those light duties proposed, like pushing the button to open the garage door, several of them, after getting their disability pension, went on to do other careers, somewhat strenuous careers, like become an auxiliary police officer, not NOPD. It's another police department in the state of Louisiana. Licensed plumbers, electricians, contractors, carpenters. Again, doesn't seem reasonable that this could happen. Now let's look at the comparison between the state firefighters pension system, which I said is everyone in the state except for New Orleans and I believe Baton Rouge, and New Orleans. And as you can see, New Orleans, for the last 3 years, that's the records they gave us. For the last 3 years, they're at 80% disability. The state firefighters pension system, according to their actuarial report in 2015, has 1,603 firefighters on ordinary or regular retirement, which is about 90%, and they have 187 firefighters on disability, which is about 10%. The state, if a firefighter for the state system is the potential to earn income or has outside insurance or has a way to make additional money, they can't get more than 100%. They offset that money. New Orleans does not do that. That's why we said there's lucrative incentives to go out on disability, because you can earn more than 100% for New Orleans. There's one more pension calculation that we need to discuss that the city of New Orleans, meaning the taxpayers, have to pay. When the state of Louisiana has revised statute 113384, and that establishes how to calculate pension benefits, how to calculate a pension. And it depends on the number of years you work. For the first 12 years of service, you get 2.5%. After you hit 12 years of service and are at least 50 years of age, 12 years and 50 years of age, you get 3.33% calculated for your pension. This is for disability and regulars, for everybody. The pension board applies this differently. They ignore the 50, in the records they gave us for the 3 years we looked at, they ignore the 50-year age requirement. And as soon as a New Orleans firefighter hits 12 years of service, they give them 3.33% for the rest of their career. Then when a firefighter hits 30 years of service, they go back and retroactively grab the first 12 years at 3.33%, effectively giving someone's entire career 3.33%. In 2015, this cost the city of New Orleans an additional $2.6 million by their application. For supplemental earnings benefits, the $30,000 a year that they can get costs the city of New Orleans, not the pension board. The pension board approves the pension, even if they're paying 100%. They're not paying any of these other costs. It's all borne by the city, meaning the citizens, the taxpayers. But their actions trigger all these things from happening. They approve it, and these things, all these expenses come in. So for supplemental earnings benefits alone, in 2015, the city of New Orleans paid an additional $5.5 million just to disability firefighters, just to disability firefighter pensions. So what does that mean if we put these numbers together? If you take the supplemental earnings benefits that the city paid out, and if you take the money that they paid, the $2.6 million from the application of the statute, and if we compare it to the state firefighter system, and if the city would mirror the state's firefighter system and not provide incentives to go over 100%, and they can get 10% disability here in New Orleans, that would be a 70% reduction, a 70% savings for the city of New Orleans. And here's the numbers. It comes to $8.8 million a year in savings. Since 1999, that's $150 million. Now, these numbers are very hard to comprehend because they are so large. The numbers are so big, but they're actual dollars borne by the city of New Orleans, not the pension board. But the numbers are so big, to put it in a little better perspective, I'm going to turn it back over to the Inspector General.
Yeah, just as Assistant IG Schwartz said, it's hard to take these big numbers and understand completely what they mean. So for a little perspective, that $8.8 million could have bought 125 NOPD officers. It could have built 2 firehouses per year if they wanted to do that, or many other things. The $150 million is so large that we could have, instead of wasting this money through manipulation, we could have had 22 miles of new streets with new drainage under it, almost as long as the causeway. So when you think about why it is that the city has so many problems when the tax rates are so high, this is why, because we've seen in other places it's not, the taxes are not fully collected. Here, what we see is manipulation and deceit, and we believe what occurred violated the law. And we think that this system is so bad that it needs a full review. So this office is going to do an evaluation, full evaluation of that pension system. We're going to look into the backgrounds of all these people, including the professionals involved. And we'll provide, I hope that the outcome, the output, will be recommendations for legislation to end the current arrangement, because we don't have officials who feel responsible. They have the control, but they don't have to pay for it. And this is not the first time we've seen this in New Orleans, and every time we've seen it, the people lose. We've got to get control back under the people that are responsible for paying for the costs, and that's how we'll solve this problem. Thank you. We'll take questions now.
Mr. Quatrevaux, I know you say you're going to do an investigation, but who do you believe is responsible for this manipulation, deceit, and criminal activity?
The non-city representatives on the board,
I'm sorry?
the non-city members of the pension board, the firefighters' pension and relief fund.
What about the chiropractor, that person, he or she was mentioned a lot?
Well, we, as a matter, first of all, as a matter of, we're required by ordinance to refer any evidence of credible crime to prosecutors, and we'll certainly do that. As a practice of this office, we have always referred evidence of professional misconduct to the respective disciplinary organizations in those fields. So there is one for chiropractors and there's one for actuaries.
No doubt in your mind that this was just a practice of years past and they just kept it going? You believe this was deliberate and intentional?
I think this is something that's been built over many years in various pieces, and it's come together in this horrible pension system that overpays benefits and at our expense. And they can do it because they control that board, and they don't have to pay for it. But that money could have been used in the fire department as well. So I'm not sure what the answer to your question is, but this didn't happen without the manipulation of numbers. This didn't happen without, apparently, without the desire to bump these pensions up. I mean, it's 90% versus 10%. It was 94. It's 80 versus 10% now.
Egregious to the point, in your opinion, that someone should face prosecution?
That's not a decision we make here. We will refer the information we have to appropriate prosecutors. Whether or not it's a crime is for them to determine, and then if they determine it's a crime, whether or not to prosecute is also their decision.
So for full clarity on that, you would provide what you found to the DA's office in addition to the professional organizations that regulate?
We'll send it to appropriate prosecutors.
In terms of violations of the law, is that specifically with the reporting that was done on these?
Well, what ought to be an actuarial report may be different from what the citizens in the city needs to manage the program. So it could take a narrow view and not count the 50% that the city has to pay as a consequence of their decisions. Does that make sense? All right.
Could you also talk about how you were able to find that some of the retired firefighters have found other work after retiring on disability?
Well, we had some reports from the third-party administrator and their subcontractors. We had that information. We also, well, I don't want to talk about sources and means, but we always review information that's in the public sector.
Would that be, I mean, you mentioned a few of them, I think you said contractors, others that would be permitted by the state. Is that one, I guess, avenue that you were able to find out?
I'm not sure. It really doesn't matter. We know what they do for a living. And some of these permanently disabled people carry sheetrock, 50 pounds of sheetrock up a ladder to another floor. That's pretty hard to do if you're permanently disabled. So it seems, the problem is it seems statistically impossible. It is statistically impossible that 87 out of 87 cases would result in a ruling or certification as permanently disabled. And then they go on to do these other things that require them to engage in physical activities that are probably more demanding than those of a firefighter.
Your recommendations, you basically fall in line with the state standards.
Yes.
Beyond that, though, you're still dependent on the board to assess disability and work with reputable.
That's correct. That's the first step. The second step we'll know after we complete an evaluation. But at least as an interim step, if the fund can be forced to follow the same interpretations of law and applications that the state board does, then we'll have a good effect. But longer term, I don't see any way that we can continue with a board that doesn't represent the interests of the people of New Orleans. This is crazy. This is like some other situations we have, where the people who make the decisions and have the control don't have to pay for those decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you.